What if I told you that the life someone once considered worthless would one day save their own child? What if the greatest act of courage didn't happen in front of a crowd, but in the quiet of a barn before sunrise? And what if the order to kill became the beginning of a legacy no one saw coming? This isn't just a farm story. This is a story about destiny, sacrifice, regret, and the kind of redemption that humbles a man to his core. It's about a grandfather who chose faith over obedience, and paid the price for it. It's about a fragile calf that was given a second chance, and grew into something no one could ignore. You're going to see how one decision, made in silence, rippled through time. You're going to witness a night when metal twisted, a child was trapped between life and death, and strength alone wasn't enough. You'll feel the weight of regret in a father's eyes when he realizes the life he once tried to destroy is the one that saves his son. And you'll understand why mercy is never weakness, it's delayed power. By the end of this story, you might look at your own decisions differently. You might rethink what you've called practical, and what you've dismissed as too emotional. Because sometimes the thing we're told to eliminate is the very thing meant to carry our future. So stay with me. This story builds slowly, but when it turns, it hits deep. And if stories about courage, faith, and unexpected redemption move you, make sure you hit like, subscribe, and stay close. Because this isn't just storytelling, this is legacy in motion. He always said destiny doesn't knock politely, sometimes it kicks the barn door open before sunrise. That morning the fog rolled low over the pasture, thick like unspoken regret hanging in the air. I was just a boy on my grandfather's ranch, boots too big for my feet, heart too small for what was coming. Grandpa was a quiet man, the kind whose courage didn't shout but stood steady like an old oak tree. We had learned early that farm life was built on sacrifice, some beautiful, some brutal. Cows needed milking, fences needed fixing, and sometimes, mercy needed choosing. But nothing prepared me for the tremor in his hands when the ranch owner arrived that day. The calf had been born weak the night before, legs shaking, breath shallow, eyes searching like it already knew the world was bargaining with its existence. The rancher didn't waste words. He believed in profit over prayer, numbers over faith. If that sickness spreads, he said, it'll ruin the whole herd. He spoke like a man protecting an empire, not realizing he was about to gamble with his own redemption. Kill it. Disinfect the barn. No hesitation. Just like that, a life reduced to a calculation. And I swear, in that silence, even the wind stopped to listen. I looked at my grandfather, expecting resistance, maybe anger, maybe a spark of rebellion. But what I saw was something heavier, responsibility fighting against compassion. His loyalty to his work wrestled with the kindness that built his legacy. People think courage is loud. Sometimes it's just a tear you refuse to let fall. He nodded slowly, but his eyes told a different story. There was regret already forming for something he hadn't done yet. And that's when I understood that destiny was watching us closely. Later, inside the barn, he stood over the trembling calf, rifle leaning against the wall. The animal tried to rise, stumbled, and let out a sound I still hear in my sleep. Grandpa wiped his face roughly, pretending it was just sweat. He whispered something I couldn't fully catch, maybe a prayer, maybe an apology. Faith has a strange way of appearing when logic runs out of answers. He turned away for a second, and that second changed everything. Because in that second, I made a decision of my own. I wrapped the calf in an old blanket, heart pounding like I was committing a crime. Maybe I was, at least in the eyes of the ranch owner. But sometimes redemption begins with a rule being broken for the right reason. I carried that fragile body behind the house, hiding it like a secret too sacred for the world. My grandfather saw me. He didn't stop me. That silence between us wasn't weakness, it was shared courage. And in that quiet agreement, our faith outweighed our fear. That night, under a sky scattered with stubborn stars, we worked like men on a mission. Grandpa brought herbs, old remedies passed down through generations. His true inheritance wasn't land, it was wisdom. We fed the calf warm milk, drop by drop, like feeding hope back into a fading dream. He laid his weathered hand on the animal's head and whispered, "Miracles don't come easy, son, but they come." I didn't know if he believed it or needed to hear it himself. But I remember thinking that legacy isn't built by what you own, it's built by what you save. And something inside me shifted that night. By dawn, the calf was still breathing, weak, but alive. The rancher would return soon, expecting proof of obedience. We had chosen compassion over command, faith over fear, destiny over convenience. But every act of courage demands a price. And as the sun began to rise, I saw it in my grandfather's eyes. He knew that sacrifice was coming. Not the calves, but his own. The rancher came back earlier than expected, boots striking the dry ground like a judge approaching the verdict, and I could feel my heartbeat echoing inside my ribs as if destiny itself was knocking from the inside out. Grandpa stood tall beside the barn, calm on the outside, but I knew that behind that steady posture there was a storm of regret, faith, and quiet courage colliding all at once. The air smelled of disinfectant and fresh hay, staged carefully to support the lie that the sacrifice had been made, yet the real sacrifice was only beginning. The rancher didn't ask many questions. He simply scanned the corral like a businessman auditing an investment, convinced his order had been followed without hesitation. When he finally turned away, satisfied, I realized something powerful. Sometimes redemption hides in plain sight while authority walks right past it. Grandpa didn't celebrate, didn't smile, didn't even look relieved. He understood that every act of mercy plants a seed, but seeds take time before they show their miracle. And behind the house, wrapped in old blankets, that fragile calf was breathing like a promise we weren't sure we could keep. That afternoon, the real battle began, and it wasn't against disease. It was against doubt, exhaustion, and the creeping fear that maybe we had defied destiny in the wrong direction. The calf couldn't stand on its own, its legs trembling like a newborn trying to understand gravity, and every failed attempt felt like a punch to my young faith. Grandpa moved with slow precision, crushing herbs, mixing old remedies passed down through generations, explaining to me that legacy is not what you inherit, but what you protect when no one is watching. He told me that courage doesn't always roar like thunder. Sometimes it whispers, "Try again tomorrow," even when the night feels endless. We fed the animal warm milk, not just to nourish its body, but as if we were feeding hope into something that had already been condemned by logic. There were moments when regret tried to creep into his eyes, as if he wondered whether obedience would have been easier than defiance. But then the calf would breathe a little stronger, and faith would quietly reclaim its ground. Days passed in secrecy, and hiding the animal became an operation of discipline and silent coordination, like we were guarding a treasure the world didn't value yet. I learned quickly how to move without drawing attention, how to carry buckets at different times, how to clean without leaving suspicious traces, lessons no school ever teaches. Grandpa would look at me and nod, not with pride exactly, but with recognition, as if he knew this was shaping my character more than any lecture ever could. He spoke about redemption as something that rarely arrives instantly. It's built through repeated acts of kindness when quitting would be simpler. Sometimes at night I'd sit beside the calf and talk to it about destiny, about how maybe it wasn't born weak but born chosen for something bigger. There's something about caring for a fragile life that changes a boy. It replaces fear with responsibility and replaces innocence with purpose. And slowly, almost invisibly, the animal began to respond. The first time the calf stood on its own, even if only for a few shaky seconds, it felt like witnessing a miracle unfold in real time. Grandpa didn't cheer, but his shoulders loosened in a way I had never seen before, as if a weight he'd been carrying quietly had shifted. He ran his hand along the animal's back and whispered, "See, son? Faith isn't blind, it's stubborn." That sentence stayed with me longer than any sermon ever could, because it reframed sacrifice not as loss, but as investment in unseen outcomes. The calf's eyes looked clearer now, less lost, more aware, like it understood that someone had fought for its right to breathe. Each small improvement felt like destiny rewriting its own script, and with every sunrise, the fear of being discovered mixed with growing confidence. But confidence, as I would learn, has a way of inviting new tests. Rumors travel fast in rural communities, and it didn't take long before whispers started circling about a missing calf that was supposed to have been handled. The rancher began counting livestock more carefully, his suspicion sharpening like a blade that hadn't been used in a while. Grandpa sensed it before I did. Experience teaches you to read tension in the way a man tightens his jaw or lingers too long in silence. He told me gently that courage often demands a second sacrifice, not of life, but of comfort and stability. If the truth came out, we wouldn't just lose a job, we might lose our place, our routine, our security. And that's when I understood something deeper about legacy. It's built by those willing to risk losing everything for what is right. The calf, now stronger, grazed quietly behind the house, unaware that its survival was about to cost us more than we imagined. One evening, as the sky burned orange and gold, the calf tried running for the first time, awkward but determined, and I felt something shift in the atmosphere. It wasn't just strength returning to its body, it was redemption taking shape in muscle and bone. Grandpa watched from a distance, hands resting on the fence, eyes reflecting pride mixed with quiet sorrow. He knew the rancher would eventually discover the truth. Secrets don't stay buried forever, especially when miracles grow too large to hide. Still, he never expressed regret for what we had done. His faith remained steady, rooted like the land itself. "Whatever happens next," he told me, "remember that mercy is never wasted, even when it costs you." And those words hung in the air like a warning and a promise all at once. By the end of that week, the calf was no longer fragile. It was becoming strong, alert, almost majestic in a subtle way that hinted at future greatness. But with strength came visibility, and with visibility came risk, and destiny was preparing the next chapter whether we were ready or not. The rancher's footsteps sounded closer each day, his inspections longer, his patience thinner. Grandpa began waking earlier, not out of fear, but out of acceptance that sacrifice might soon knock again at our door. I started to sense that the real test wasn't about saving the calf, it was about standing firm when consequences arrived. Faith had carried us this far, but courage would have to carry us through what was coming. And deep down, I knew the secret we protected was about to step into the light. The truth didn't explode like thunder, it slipped in quietly, the way destiny often does when it's ready to collect its debt. One afternoon, the rancher noticed fresh hoof marks behind the storage shed, marks too strong for a dying calf and too recent to ignore. He crouched down, touched the soil, and I saw suspicion rise in his eyes like smoke before a wildfire. Grandpa stood a few feet away, calm but alert, the way a man stands when he already knows the verdict is coming. There was no panic in him, just that same quiet courage that had guided every choice since the day of the order. Faith had carried us this far, but now redemption demanded exposure. And some miracles, I was learning, don't stay hidden forever. When the rancher walked behind the house and saw the calf, no, the young bull it was becoming, his face hardened instantly. The animal was stronger now, standing tall, no longer fragile, proof that sacrifice had been rewritten into survival. "You disobeyed me," he said, voice sharp, not because of the animal's health, but because of his authority being challenged. For him, this wasn't about disease anymore, it was about control. Grandpa didn't deny it, didn't invent excuses, didn't shift blame. He simply said, "It deserved a chance." And that sentence carried more legacy than any paycheck ever could. The rancher paced, anger simmering, calculating losses that had never actually happened. He spoke of rules, responsibility, risk, words that sound logical until you place them beside compassion. "You put my entire herd in danger," he insisted, though the herd was healthy and thriving. Grandpa listened respectfully, but his posture never bent, never folded under pressure. That's the thing about true courage, it doesn't argue loudly, it stands quietly. Regret flickered in the rancher's eyes for just a second, not for ordering the death, but for losing control of the narrative. And in that moment, I realized destiny wasn't just testing us, it was testing him too. "You'll leave by morning," the rancher finally said, the sentence landing heavier than any shout. The job was gone, the house included, our routine shattered in a matter of seconds. I expected anger from Grandpa, maybe even resentment. Instead, he nodded slowly, accepting the consequence without surrendering his conviction. Sacrifice had shifted, the calf had lived, but now stability would die. And sometimes redemption costs comfort before it delivers reward. The rancher walked away convinced he had restored order, unaware that history was quietly writing something else. That evening felt different from the nights before. There was no secrecy now, only transition. We packed what little we had, tools, blankets, the old herb jars, the true inheritance of our family. The calf, now visibly stronger, followed Grandpa around the yard as if sensing the change. Animals feel things we try to ignore, and this one carried a quiet awareness in its eyes. I asked Grandpa if he regretted it, if obedience would have been easier. He looked at me and said, "Ease and destiny rarely walk the same road, son." That answer settled into my bones like permanent truth. Word spread quickly in the countryside, and neighbors whispered about the man who lost his job over a sick calf. Some called it foolish pride, Others called it unnecessary risk. But a few, the ones who understood faith, called it integrity. Legacy is strange like that. It doesn't bloom instantly, it grows underground before anyone notices. The rancher might have thought he was protecting his future, but Grandpa had protected something far more valuable, his soul. And though we were leaving at sunrise, we weren't leaving defeated. We were leaving aligned with something bigger than fear. At dawn, we walked away from the ranch, the bull, no longer just a calf, trailing behind us like living proof of defied destiny. The sun rose soft and golden, as if the world itself approved of quiet acts of redemption. I glanced back once, expecting to feel regret, but what I felt instead was clarity. Sacrifice had cost us land, but it had strengthened our character. And character, Grandpa always said, compounds like interest when invested wisely. As we approached the neighboring property, unaware of how life was about to turn again, I had no idea that this very animal would one day rewrite not just our story, but the rancher's as well. The neighboring farmer didn't ask too many questions. Maybe he recognized something familiar in Grandpa's steady eyes, the kind of man who values legacy over comfort and faith over convenience. He offered simple work, modest pay, and a small corner of land where we could stay, and sometimes that's all destiny needs, a small opening. The bull adapted faster than we expected, as if hardship had forged resilience into his bones instead of weakness. Where once he trembled, now he stood firm, muscles forming beneath his hide like a silent declaration of redemption. I watched him grow day after day, and it felt like witnessing courage made visible. Grandpa treated him not like property, but like a life that carried purpose beyond profit. And purpose, when nurtured with sacrifice, has a way of multiplying. By the end of the first year, he wasn't just strong, he was extraordinary. Broad chest, powerful shoulders, steady temperament, a rare balance between force and gentleness. The farmer would often shake his head in disbelief and say, "That one's got destiny written all over him." And I'd smile quietly, remembering the blanket, the herbs, the whispered prayers. Redemption isn't loud, it reveals itself slowly, like sunrise pushing back darkness inch by inch. The bull moved with confidence now, not arrogance, there's a difference. Strength rooted in survival carries humility. People in the area began to notice. When carts got stuck in mud after heavy rains, they would call for our bull. When machinery failed or engines spun uselessly in thick soil, he would step in with patient power. It wasn't just brute force, it was controlled, disciplined energy, the kind built through hardship. Grandpa would place his hand on the rope and guide him with minimal effort, as if they shared a silent language. And every time the wheels rolled free from the mud, I saw something deeper than physical strength. I saw legacy in motion. Word spread beyond neighboring farms. They called him the Miracle Bull, though few knew the full story behind that nickname. Farmers who once dismissed Grandpa's choice now looked at him differently, not with pity, but with respect. Sacrifice had matured into proof. Faith had turned into tangible outcome. And even I, once just a boy hiding a trembling calf, felt my understanding of courage evolving. It's one thing to save a life, it's another to see that life change others. There were evenings when Grandpa would sit on the fence, watching the bull graze peacefully under the fading sun. He didn't speak much, but sometimes he'd say, "See, son? Mercy compounds." At the time I didn't fully grasp it, but now I understand. Every act of compassion builds momentum. The bull wasn't just an animal anymore. He was a living testimony that destiny can be redirected by bold faith. And when you protect something vulnerable, it often grows into something powerful. That's a lesson that applies far beyond farms and fences. It applies to people, to dreams, to choices we make when no one is applauding. As the bull entered full maturity, his presence commanded attention. Not because he was aggressive, but because he was dependable. There's something magnetic about reliability, in animals and in humans alike. He could pull heavy loads without panic, navigate difficult terrain without hesitation, and respond to the slightest guidance from Grandpa. That kind of trust doesn't happen overnight, it's built through shared struggle. And in that partnership, I saw a reflection of our own journey, displaced but not defeated. Stripped of comfort but rich in character. But destiny, I was beginning to understand, never elevates something without preparing it for a defining moment. The bull's strength had become known across the countryside, his reputation solidified like iron in fire. And just when life felt stable again, predictable, even peaceful, a night would come that would test everything we believed about sacrifice, redemption, and courage. A night where strength would no longer be about pulling carts from mud. A night where a life would hang between earth and sky. And when that moment arrived, the past would collide with the present in a way none of us saw coming. It was one of those nights when the wind moves differently, like it's carrying something heavier than air, something that smells like destiny about to collide with reality. The sky was dark, no moon, just scattered stars fighting to be seen, and the countryside felt unusually restless. Grandpa had just finished tying the gate when we heard it, a distant engine revving too hard, too desperate. You learn to recognize panic even through machinery. It has a rhythm of its own. Then came the screech, metal against gravel, followed by a sickening silence that swallowed the valley whole. Silence like that doesn't mean peace. It means something has gone terribly wrong. Seconds later, a voice shattered the darkness. "Help! Somebody, please help!" It wasn't just shouting, it was fear stripped raw, the kind that comes from staring at irreversible loss. Grandpa didn't hesitate. Courage rarely asks for permission. We grabbed lanterns and ran toward the sound, boots slamming against the earth, hearts racing faster than our steps. As we reached the edge of the slope, we saw headlights twisted at impossible angles below the ridge. The car had gone down the embankment, half crushed against a tree. The father was outside the vehicle, bleeding from the forehead, shaking uncontrollably. "My boy, he's trapped. He's still inside," he kept repeating, like saying it differently might change the outcome. The front of the car had folded inward, metal wrapped around the driver's seat like a steel cage. You could hear the faint whimper of a child struggling to breathe, pinned by weight that logic said couldn't be moved. There was no tow truck nearby, no machinery, no time to wait. Regret hovered in the father's eyes, the kind that flashes when you realize control was always an illusion. And in that moment, destiny stood between life and death. Grandpa looked at me, and I didn't need instructions. We ran back toward the pasture where the bull rested, calm despite the commotion in the air. It's strange how animals sense urgency before humans fully process it. The bull lifted his head, steady, as if he already knew this was his moment. Grandpa secured the harness quickly, movements precise despite the stakes. "Easy, boy," he whispered, voice steady but firm. "Faith doesn't eliminate fear, it moves forward with it." We guided him carefully down the slope, lantern light dancing over twisted metal and broken glass. The father watched with desperate hope, not fully understanding what was about to happen. The bull positioned himself near the crushed front of the car, muscles tensing under his hide like coiled power waiting for release. Grandpa secured the rope around the frame, double-checked every knot, because sacrifice without preparation becomes recklessness. Then he gave the signal, a soft command, nothing dramatic. The bull leaned forward, hooves digging into the soil. And the impossible began to shift. Metal groaned under pressure, gravel slid, the rope stretched tight as destiny pulled against gravity. The car inched upward, slowly at first, then with greater force as the bull anchored himself with unwavering strength. The father fell to his knees, whispering prayers he probably hadn't spoken in years. Inside, the boy cried out, alive, still fighting. Every muscle in the bull's body strained, but there was no panic, only disciplined power forged from survival. This wasn't just strength, it was redemption in motion. And within seconds that felt like eternity, the pressure on the driver's seat eased. Grandpa and the father rushed forward, pulling the boy free from twisted steel. The child was bruised, shaken, but breathing, alive because courage once chose mercy over obedience. The father sobbed openly now, clutching his son like a man who had just seen the edge of forever and stepped back. He kept repeating, "I'll pay you anything, any amount, just tell me what you want." He saw the bull not as a miracle born from sacrifice, but as a powerful asset. He didn't recognize him yet. But recognition was coming, and with it, a wave of regret that would change everything. The boy was laid gently on the grass, breathing uneven but alive, and in that fragile rhythm you could almost hear destiny rewriting a sentence that had nearly ended in tragedy. The father held him close, trembling not from cold, but from the sudden understanding of how thin the line is between presence and absence. He looked up at Grandpa, eyes soaked in gratitude, and then at the bull, still standing firm, chest rising slow and steady like nothing extraordinary had just happened. "Name your price," he said again, voice breaking under the weight of relief. It wasn't arrogance, it was desperation disguised as generosity. He believed money could measure the miracle he had just witnessed. But redemption doesn't come with a price tag. Grandpa removed his hat slowly, not as a gesture of submission, but of respect for life spared. "There's no amount," he said calmly, his tone steady like a man who had already calculated what truly matters. The father frowned slightly, confused. In his world, everything had a value attached. "You don't understand," he insisted. "That bull just saved my son's life." And that's when something shifted in the air, recognition hovering just out of reach. Grandpa stepped closer, lantern light brushing against the man's face. "Sir, you've seen this animal before." The father blinked, searching memory like flipping through old pages he never meant to revisit. The countryside has a way of preserving faces and moments, even when we pretend they're forgotten. His eyes moved from the bull's broad chest to the steady gaze, and something familiar flickered. "You used to work for me," he said slowly, as realization began stitching itself together. I watched regret form in real time, not theatrical, not loud, just heavy. Because destiny has a cruelly poetic timing sometimes. And this was one of those moments. "Yes," Grandpa replied gently, without bitterness. "This is the calf you ordered me to kill." The words didn't need volume, they carried their own gravity. The father's expression changed completely, confusion, disbelief, then the slow collapse of certainty. He looked at the bull again, but this time not as property, not as strength, but as consequence. Sacrifice had preserved the very force that now saved his son. And redemption had come full circle. Silence followed, thicker than the fog on that first morning months ago. The father's shoulders lowered, not in defeat, but in humility. Regret is different from guilt. Guilt stings, regret reshapes you. "I was protecting my herd," he murmured weakly, as if trying to defend an old version of himself. Grandpa nodded softly. "I know." He didn't shame him, didn't accuse, didn't reopen wounds. True courage doesn't humiliate, it reveals. The father knelt beside the bull now, touching its side gently, almost reverently. He understood something deeper in that moment. Authority had nearly destroyed what compassion preserved. His son, still recovering in his arms, was breathing because someone else chose faith over fear. Legacy isn't built in boardrooms or through commands shouted across fields. It's built in quiet decisions when no one is clapping. Tears rolled freely down his face, and this time they weren't just from relief. They were from realization. "I was wrong," he finally admitted, voice barely above a whisper. It wasn't a public apology, it was something more powerful, private transformation. Destiny had handed him a mirror, and he didn't look away. He stood up slowly, facing Grandpa not as employer to worker, but as man to man. "You saved my boy, and I almost destroyed the life that did it." Redemption had touched them both, one through courage, the other through humility. And what he said next would shape the final chapter of this story. The father stood there longer than necessary, staring at the bull like a man looking at his own past made flesh and bone. You could almost see the gears turning in his mind, recalculating not profit, but meaning. Destiny had cornered him gently, not with punishment, but with perspective. He walked toward Grandpa slowly, each step heavier than the last, because humility weighs more than pride. "I can't undo what I ordered," he began, voice steadier now, but stripped of authority. "But I can decide who I become from this point forward." And that sentence carried the beginning of redemption. He didn't offer money this time. He didn't talk about ownership or price. Instead, he offered partnership, something far more radical. "I want you back on my land," he said, not as a command, but as a request. Not as an employee, as a partner. Regret had matured into respect. And respect, when genuine, changes the structure of relationships. I watched Grandpa carefully, because this was a different kind of test. Forgiveness isn't weakness, but it requires courage equal to defiance. He could have refused out of pride, could have held on to the wound like proof of past injustice. But legacy isn't about revenge, it's about elevation. He studied the man in front of him, measuring sincerity the way farmers measure rainfall, patiently. Faith had guided him before, now wisdom had to speak. And silence stretched between them like a bridge waiting to be crossed. You understand what this means? Grandpa finally asked. The father nodded. It means I lead differently. That was the key, not position, but transformation. The ranch wasn't just land, it was influence, example, structure. And influence without compassion is fragile. Destiny had given him a second chance not just to recover his son, but to reshape his leadership. Sacrifice had planted something far bigger than survival. The bull stood quietly beside us, unaware of contracts and ownership, yet central to all of it. Strength born from mercy had rewritten power dynamics. It's funny how life works. The one considered disposable became indispensable. The father placed his hand over his heart and said, "This animal reminded me what matters." And in that admission, regret completed its transformation into growth. Redemption doesn't erase the past, but it reframes it. And this was reframing in real time. Grandpa looked at me briefly, and in that glance I saw something deeper than approval. I saw a lesson solidifying. Courage influences beyond the immediate moment. What started as a hidden act of compassion had now reshaped an entire future. Partnership meant shared decisions, shared responsibility, shared legacy. It meant building a ranch where sacrifice would never again be dictated by fear alone. Faith had survived exposure. Now it was about to influence culture. As we walked back toward the house that night, nothing felt the same. The father carried his son with gentler hands, and his steps were slower, thoughtful. Grandpa walked beside him, not above, not below, beside. The bull followed calmly, the silent architect of change. Destiny had come down the hill violently, but it was leaving quietly, restored. And though it felt like the story had reached its highest point, there was still one final truth waiting to be spoken. The weeks that followed didn't feel dramatic, but they felt different, and sometimes that's how true destiny settles in, quietly reshaping the ground beneath your feet. Grandpa returned to the ranch, not as a hired hand, but as a voice that mattered, a presence that influenced decisions beyond fences and feed schedules. The father kept his word. Leadership softened, not into weakness, but into wisdom. Orders were no longer barked without thought, and fear was no longer the first solution offered to problems. Sacrifice still existed, farm life demands it, but it was no longer blind or rushed. Faith had carved space for reflection. And redemption had rewritten the tone of authority. The bull became more than strength. He became a symbol woven into the daily rhythm of the land. Children from neighboring farms would come just to see him, to hear the story whispered like countryside folklore. They didn't just see muscle, they saw meaning. Legacy travels differently than rumor, it grows roots. Grandpa would sometimes tell them, courage doesn't always look heroic. Sometimes it looks stubborn. And the kids would laugh, not fully understanding yet. But seeds were being planted. The father changed in subtle ways first. He walked the fields more often, not inspecting for profit, but observing with awareness. He began asking questions instead of giving immediate commands. Regret hadn't crushed him, it had refined him. That's the difference between shame and growth. One paralyzes, the other redirects. He spoke openly about the night his son nearly died, not to dramatize it, but to remind himself of the cost of rigid thinking. Redemption had become part of his vocabulary. The boy who had been trapped in twisted metal recovered fully. Sometimes he'd run his small hand across the bull's side, eyes wide with quiet gratitude. Children understand miracles better than adults. They don't overcomplicate them. He once asked his father, "Would he be alive if you had gotten your way before?" The question landed gently, but deeply. The father didn't avoid it. He answered honestly, "No." And that honesty became the foundation of a different kind of legacy. Not perfection, growth. Not control, stewardship. The ranch prospered, not just financially, but relationally. Workers felt heard. Decisions carried reflection. Faith no longer felt like weakness in business, it felt like strength with foresight. As for Grandpa, he never bragged about being right. True courage doesn't replay its victories, it simply continues choosing wisely. He would sit by the fence at dusk, hat tilted forward, watching the land he once left under tension. I once asked him if he ever felt regret for the cost we paid back then. He smiled slightly and said, "Mercy is never an expense. It's an investment." And that line stayed with me longer than any lesson in school. Years later, when the bull grew older and slower, he was never treated as expendable. He had earned more than utility, he had earned honor. Destiny had started with a death sentence, and ended with transformation. Sacrifice had shifted from destruction to protection. Regret had turned into wisdom. Redemption had reshaped leadership. And legacy? Legacy was no longer about ownership, it was about mercy remembered. So now I want to ask you something, honestly. If you were standing in that barn that morning, hearing the order to kill, would you have obeyed without question? Or would you have risked everything for something that looked weak, insignificant, disposable? Because that's the real question this story leaves us with. Not about a bull, not about a ranch, but about the moments in our own lives when fear disguises itself as logic. How many times do we eliminate something too early? A dream, a relationship, a person who just needed time. What if the very thing you're tempted to give up on is the thing meant to save you later? Tell me in the comments. What part of this story hit you the hardest? Was it the sacrifice, the regret, the redemption, or the moment destiny came down that hill? And now I want you to challenge me. Drop the name of a song in the comments, any language, any genre, and let's transform it into a story that no one saw coming. Subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and stay with us. Because here, music doesn't just get played. It gets reborn as legacy.